In 1963, Walter Tevis released the novel The Man Who Fell to Earth, the story of an alien traveling to Earth in a last-ditch effort to save his dying race from their barren homeworld. Later, in 1976, it would become a movie of the same name directed by Nicholas Roeg. The story would go on to be adapted into a TV movie in 1987 and a miniseries in 2022, but the 1976 movie remains the most famous of them all. This is most likely due to the fact that it stars David Bowie. Now, that is how I found out about the book. See, I am a fan of the glam rock musician David Bowie. I mean, I have his poster there. I have a poster in this corner. I have at least 3 posters on my closet doors. And I have a large selection of his vinyls. Or of his albums on vinyl, I should say, is probably a better phrasing of that. But I sought out the movie and came across the fact it was a book. And, being the person I am, I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm going to read that book. And so I ordered the book. But I couldn't watch the movie at the time because it was not available on any streaming services, at least not for free. And I'm cheap in the fact I don't pay for movies on streaming when I don't have to. So I kind of just decided, you know what, I'll read the book first. That isn't a normal thing for me, honestly. I actually tend to watch a movie first and then read the book, as is the case with, like, A Clockwork Orange, or The Martian, or even The Fault in Our Stars. So it was a little bit different for me to do it this way, but I'm glad that I did, because I thoroughly enjoyed the novel. Now, it's not a standard sci-fi story. It doesn't have, or at least the focus isn't solely on extraterrestrial beings and fantastical worlds and futuristic technology. Rather, it's focused more on human traits such as isolation, alcoholism, pressure, and self-destruction. In fact, Tevis likens the book to more of a vessel of an autobiography than just a straight-up sci-fi story. I went into this novel pretty unaware of anything other than the basics of an alien traveling to Earth to save his planet, and I truly found it to be an endearing and relatable story, as well as just being overall very human for a sci-fi book. I also decided that I wanted to share my personal feelings and thoughts on the novel, and my thoughts on the 1976 movie as well, seeing as I have now watched that as well, too. So sit back, relax, do whatever it is you like to do when you watch videos like this, and let's talk about The Man Who Fell to Earth, the 1963 novel by Walter Tevis, and the 1976 film adaptation. First and foremost, let's talk about the storyline before I kind of dive into more things. I'm going to give you just like an overview of it. So, Thomas Jerome Newton, our leading alien, has traveled to Earth to begin his mission. He needs money, enough to build a ship, to make it back to his dying homeworld and to allow the dwindling number of his race, the Anthians, to come back to Earth. He starts making seed money by selling gold rings, and then once he gets enough money, he starts creating patents, and he builds his own, corporation, essentially. Along the way, he picks up a skeptical professor named Nathan Bryce and a nurse/maid named Betty Jo. And he also picks up a burgeoning addiction to alcohol. As Newton's side project, which is his ship, starts production, he really starts questioning why he's doing all of this, what the point is, and he realizes he's losing himself and becoming more and more human as time passes. Now, Bryce becomes aware that Newton is not of Earth, and Newton finally decides just to tell him the truth, something he's grateful to do since he hasn't been able to before, only to have been bugged by the US government, and who have been investigating him for being an alien, possibly, and he basically gets arrested and held in captivity. But while in captivity, he starts to feel relief for the first time since arriving on Earth years prior. So soon he does get released, and on his way out, during one of their big testing sessions on him, he accidentally is blinded. So, once released, he decides, due to the blindness and everything else, he decides to abandon the project and essentially the mission that he was entrusted with, leaving his people kind of stranded and likely to die off. In the end of the novel, Bryce tracks him down and finds that Newton has become a depressed alcoholic who has basically given up on everything. And that's how the novel ends. Depressing, right? Now, I like books that don't have a typical ending like that, where it's not some happy, joyful ending, everything's kind of resolved at least a little bit until, especially when it's a series, everything's resolved until it reaches the next novel, or, and this is a solo novel. This is just a singular one-off thing. So I really loved that the ending was not a big happy ending, because I like books like that diverge from that need to be happy. So, what I noticed first and foremost in the book is there is a lot of emphasis on the painting The Landscape of the Fall of Icarus by Peter Bruegel, which I know I'm butchering that name. I'm so sorry. And it basically kind of hints at it being a modernized retelling of that myth. The book is further kind of delved into it by being broken into 3 sections. Icarus Ascending, Rumpelstiltskin, and Icarus Descending. So, obviously, we're kind of supposed to think that, Newton is Icarus in this scenario. He is, coming to Earth with this big mission of high importance, with this high hopes, which, before I get further, let me quickly recap the myth of Icarus. While escaping the labyrinth, he flies too close to the sun with wax wings and melts, falling to his death. I'm sure we've all heard the myth of Icarus, but just to be safe. So, essentially, Newton is Icarus in this scenario, and he comes to save his dying homeworld with this big plan. And as he further gets involved in human life, he begins to falter. And he gets too close to the goal, essentially. It was too big of a dream. And he falls victim to humanity, essentially. And that's it. I also like to think, possibly, maybe kind of, sort of, the Anthonyans are also an Icarus situation in themselves. Sending a solo man to do all of this stuff, which is too big of a task. And he falls victim, which causes them to lose their ability to come home. So, I think you can kind of look at it both ways. But obviously, I think Newton for sure is the Icarus in this scenario. And this is further backed by the fact they focus specifically on that painting, which also has a poem that goes with it. And I'm not going to get into the poem because I don't want to deal with trying to pull that out. But it has, the people who are just oblivious to Icarus's descent and death. And I think that's essentially what's happening here. Throughout the novel, Newton is going through this inner turmoil that no one else is really privy to. Not only due to the fact that how could you know what's going on in someone else's mind, but also due to the fact that he has to keep everything so secretive, and the fact that he's not from Earth, and, he could die if he found out. So he's really left to being by himself and flying too close and falling to his death. And I think that is something that I really enjoyed, that metaphor here. I think the Icarus metaphor is very well played in stories and stuff like that, and I really liked this version of it. Especially focusing so heavily on just that he was so isolated, which is a huge theme in the book, is that isolation that Newton feels, and likening it to the painting, not just the myth. But, whatever. But even early on in the novel, Newton is shown to start to be cracking under the weight of his responsibilities and questioning why he's even doing it. And the more time he spends on Earth around humans, the more he's starting to really feel like he can't handle it. How could other people handle it? Now, keep in mind, he's been, training to do this for 20 years on his planet before he came to Earth. So he is more prepared than any of them are to come to Earth, and he cannot handle it. It's very different from what he was experienced, or his knowledge of the planet. There's a lot, and it's kind of shown that the Antheans are more of a logical being rather than an emotional being. But the more and more time Newton is charading as a human, the more he's becoming one throughout the novel. This leads to him with this doubt and feeling the weight that, he is the sole savior of his people, and leads to him falling down the rabbit hole of using alcohol as a crutch to get through those emotions. Basically, he's trying to numb those emotions so he doesn't feel them, so that he can do this. And one of the things that I really liked as well was the idea that while he's in captivity, he's free. And I think that's a lot due to the fact when he's captive, he can't do anything. He can't build the ship to save his people, and there's nothing he can do to get out of the captivity. So he feels this weight and this pressure all off of him, and he's relieved for the first time that he doesn't have this set goal to reach. And however, it is different than when he does end up giving up the project, because he doesn't have a choice to be in captivity. But he does have the choice to continue the project once he's freed, and he doesn't. And I think him getting blinded is the last little thing he needs to just give up entirely. He's already shown to be thinking of giving up prior to being captive. Getting held in captivity, he doesn't have to make that choice, but when he's freed and blinded, he's given that choice, so he can either continue to struggle, now with blindness on top of that weight and that pressure and that struggle he's feeling internally, or he can give up. But giving up causes him to deal with the weight. He trades in the weight of succeeding with the weight of failing and being the reason his people can't survive. Which leads him to alcohol again, but this time more to deal with the fact of what he's done, or in this case, not done, and leaves him, down the rabbit hole of that. Now, I am not somebody who has dealt with addiction personally. I have witnessed other people who have, but that alcohol becomes his crutch, and it becomes, and a lot of people, that becomes what gets them through life and their day. And it's very much a not happy ending that I enjoyed, no matter how depressing it was. But we also see, and it's mentioned numerous times, how throughout the novel, Newton becomes more and more human the more he's, surrounded by them. And he discovers things like self-indulgences and selfishness and alcohol and, that almost free will that he doesn't have on his planet because it's so much more just logic-based. And he's also, later in the book, kind of tells Bryce that his people aren't aware of all of this emotion and this stuff that humans deal with, this humanity in general. And he can't see them coming to Earth and it working. He's trying to justify why he wants to give up, and it's understandable. I mean, if he can't handle it, how could anyone else handle it? And it's really just this whole thing that is just a struggle for him. Now, let's talk about the goddamn movie with Bowie. First and foremost, Bowie, perfect casting. Based on the description of the character in the novel, Bowie was the perfect choice of casting. And despite the fact that he himself admits that he kind of just showed up as himself at the time, this was during the height of one of his cocaine addiction. He fucking nailed it. He does. He nails the part. But let me talk about some differences between the book and the movie, which there's always differences between books and movies. But these ones made not a lot of sense to me. This first one that literally makes no sense to me is they changed Betty Jo's name to Mary Lou. Why? I don't know. It bothers me to a great extent because it makes no sense to change that aspect of it. But it's weird. It's a change that didn't need to happen, and it just seems really out of the blue and unnecessary and weird to change that aspect of it. But but there's a lot of other differences too. That one's just the one that sticks out to me as being so completely unnecessary. It's ridiculous. No. He's trying to jump on things he's not supposed to. Sorry. My cat is. He's sitting on my lap. You can't see him, but he's here. So Nathan Bryce is also portrayed in the novel as being a very lonely man, whereas in the movie, he's constantly hooking up with his students. Big change there. Don't get me wrong, Rip Torn wasn't a bad-looking guy. He's who plays Nathan Bryce in the movie, by the way. Rip Torn wasn't a bad-looking guy, but, even then, it's kind of like, really? I don't think this needs to happen. Also, Newton's mission is just to get water to his planet and not bring his entire race to Earth. There's like a whole big point in the middle of the book about how Newton's race was going to be brought over to Earth, and as their gift to the Earthlings, they were going to be scattered all over the globe to kind of hide out, but also to help make these more logical decisions and prevent wars and stuff like that as their gift, and basically manipulate the government into not destructing themselves or destroying the world. Which, noble in a degree, but also you want to take over, essentially. But that is kind of dropped because they're just trying to get water back to Newton's homeworld. So that's weird to me that they would change that. I understand why they changed it. It's a little less confusing in an already overly confusing movie, but still, it doesn't seem like a necessity. There was also the difference in the element of the relationship between Betty Jo and Newton. Or in this case, Mary Lou and Newton, depending on what you're discussing. In the novel, Betty Jo and Newton's relationship is purely platonic. Like, Betty Jo wants Newton, but Newton's like, nah, I'm married, I got a kid, no. And it's basically that he knows that she's in love with him, but he does not feel the same way, and straight tells her that it's not gonna happen. Whereas in the movie, Mary Lou and Newton have a sexual and romantic relationship together. And Mary Lou is being portrayed as almost somewhat abusive to him. I understand the need to have romance and, a motion picture movie. It has audiences more intrigued and sticking around, but the consistent nudity and sex scenes is just, to me, not it. One or two I could understand, but when there's a lot of full frontal nudity, it's a lot. And in particular, the alien sex scene makes me so uncomfortable. It doesn't need to be here, bro. You could have saved 15 minutes of this movie by cutting some of that down. Just that scene alone, But I do understand how it's kind of portrayed as Newton discussed, feeling and understanding differences between the humans and himself. I don't like it. And I will never like it. Okay? It's just too much for me. Another difference in that same regard is Mary Lou finds out the truth about Newton, whereas Betty Jo, even though she kind of has suspicion something's weird, never finds out. And I don't understand that change either. I know there's that relationship dynamic they're creating for this movie, but at the same time, why are we doing this? I don't know. There's a bigger obsession with TV in the movie as well. You know, the Anthenians learned about humans through television, but Newton's obsession with it in the movie is just a little odd, a little overdone to me. There's also the fact that Newton doesn't get caught until he's like in the ship trying it out for the first time, whereas in the novel he goes to a convention, his hotel room gets bugged, he tells Bryce everything, and then as soon as he comes back home, he's arrested. It's a difference. That's, it's very nitpicky, that one is, but I'm gonna be nitpicky because I'm that bitch. I have shut off movies for differences between that and the novel. And I will cite this for you. Child 44, there is a novel, and there is a major plot point at the very beginning that you need to know for this plot point. It's a huge plot point in the book, not in the movie. The movie is so different. And just that very basic thing. I couldn't get past it. I shut it off very quickly because I hated the fact, because I looked into it too, and that whole plot point, that whole part of the plot is just cut in the movie. I'm like, that's like a huge part of the book. Why the fuck are you cutting it? So, but I'm a nitpicky person when it comes to books and movies to a degree. But yeah, I did not. There's a lot of little nitpicky things I could continue to talk about. I'm not going to, but yeah. And there's something I need to mention. The goddamn cookie scene where Newton smacks the tray of cookies out of Mary Lou's hand. So confused at why that's there and why it's what's being portrayed. I literally laugh every time I see that clip or that scene in the movie. I've watched the movie multiple times now, but yeah. And the movie is so much more confusing than the novel. I'm so glad I read the novel, so I had a basic foundation of what happens in that order, so that the movie would make more sense. I didn't hate the movie. Book's way better. But the movie does provide a quote that I just adore, and I actually want to get a tattoo with the quote in it. And it's all things begin and end in eternity, and it's just beautiful. Now, I've been waiting for this section here. I love quotes from books, movies, etc. So, in this section, I'm going to title Words of Wisdom. I'm going to give you a rundown of some of the quotes I found in the book that I thoroughly enjoyed, as well as their page numbers for my copy of the book. Now, this copy of the book is an old copy of the book. It is copyrighted as being a printing from 1976. So the same year the movie came out. That's how old this book is. So, I'm going to read them from this piece of this paper, so it's easier for me to read to you. He was human, but not properly a man. Also manlike, he was susceptible to fear, to love, to intense physical pain, and to self-pity. That's on page 9. Page 47. He began to feel what he had sometimes felt before, a heavy lassitude, a world weariness, a profound fatigue with this busy, destructive world and all its chittering noises. He felt as though he could give the whole thing up, and that it was foolish, impossibly foolish, to have even started it more than 20 years before. He looked around again, tiredly. What was he doing here? Here on this other world, third from the sun, 100 million miles from home. He got up and turned the television set off, and then sat deeply in the chair, still drinking the wine, feeling the alcohol now, and not caring. Page 99. And why had he been dropping hints about himself? Talking about war and the second coming, calling himself Rumpelstiltskin, the evil little dwarf who came from nowhere to weave straw into gold and to save the princess's life with his unheard of knowledge, and the stranger whose final purpose was to steal the princess's child. The only way to defeat Rumpelstiltskin was to uncover his identity, to name him. Page 94. These are not in order, by the way. These are just from a group of stuff that I had. So, page 94. And he, The Anthean, a superior being from a superior race, was losing control, becoming a degenerate, a drunkard, a lost and foolish creature, a renegade, and possibly a traitor to his own. Page 100. And as for himself, Thomas Jerome Newton, whose magic and whose deceptions were greater than those of any enchanter or elf in any fairy tale, and he had read them all, did he now want to be found, caught? This one is a very short one, page 88. Altogether, everywhere, alone. My God, he said aloud, my God, you frightened, self-pitying heathenists, liars, chauvinists, fools. And what am I, he thought, if not a frightened, self-pitying hedonist? Page 101. Page 133. But damn it, you're not gods. No, but have your gods ever saved you before? Is there such thing as human destiny, the right to fulfill ourselves, to live out our own lives, and to take our own consequences? Page 134. Now, there's a lot more I could read off for you guys. I'm not going to because I'm not a dick. And that seemed a little excessive for what I had, but yeah. Would I recommend this book and would I recommend the movie? I would highly recommend the book, as it deals with a lot of very relatable topics, or at least topics that are relatable to me. And it's a really easy read. I got through it in like a day, and I'm a little bit of a slow read. Like, I'm not a fast reader by any means, but it's a very easy book to read, and I've reread it actually already a couple of times. So, yes, I do highly recommend the book. The movie is another story. I do recommend it as a must-watch, just for Bowie fans in general, just to see how great of a performance Bowie does. And just in general, you know, it's a very big piece of Bowie history, you know? And that it's his first movie role, you know, and he's the star of it, and he really nails the role, in my opinion. It's also a very artsy film, so it's kind of a very selective type of film for people. It's not going to be for everybody, and there's a lot of nudity, so if you don't like nudity, that is something you should be aware of. It's kind of up to your discretion based on kind of what I've talked about a little bit in this video. If you want to watch it or not, I would say it's a movie that you could watch once at least in your life, but I could also understand wanting to skip it or shutting it off halfway through. It's a little boring and overly long. But yeah, it's a movie I enjoy and I've watched a few times, but it's not like a top favorite movie for me, if that helps at all. You guys don't know my taste, so it doesn't help, but you know, whatever. But yeah, I would love to know your guys' thoughts on the movie and on the book. Did you enjoy them? Why or why not? And I would love if you guys want to share your opinions in the comments below. You are free to. Yeah. Happy 2026. It's been a while. Life has been keeping me busy. I've moved. I've had other issues. You know, it's just life. But yeah, I decided I have been trying to make this video for a few months, but, you know, moving and all this other stuff has kind of come before it. I have recorded at least 2 different videos that are completely different from this one, but I think this is probably the one I'm going to use just because I think it's not as boring. But, you know, maybe I'm going to use this one. But obviously, if you're watching it this far, this is the one I used. And also because, you know, I think this is the perfect time to release it. It is the anniversary of the untimely death of Bowie. And it's the 10-year anniversary, no less. So, you know, things great. Also, my hair has changed again. And yes, it is very much just directly inspired by David Bowie's hair from this time period that this movie was filmed in. The Thin White Duke era, which is I love the music from that era. But yeah, it felt this was the right time, and I think it was. So I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, night, afternoon, mid-morning, evening, whatever time it is for you. I hope it's wonderful. And, you know, I hope you guys are just doing great. And you're spreading love and kindness and positivity. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And thank you so much for watching.